It was a chilly January morning in 1947 when the quiet streets of Los Angeles hid a secret so shocking that it would haunt the city for decades. On a vacant lot in Leimert Park, a young woman's body was discovered, cut in half at the waist, drained of blood, and posed with a haunting precision that seemed almost ritualistic. Newspapers would later call her the Black Dahlia, a name that would become infamous, whispered in every corner of Hollywood. But behind the headlines, behind the sensationalized stories, there was a real person with dreams, fears, and a life that ended in brutal mystery. Who was she? And more importantly, who could have done this? Elizabeth Short, barely 22, had come to Los Angeles, chasing a dream like thousands of others. Fame, fortune, a shot at the Hollywood lights. She was young, ambitious, and vibrant, with a smile that could charm strangers and a persistence that defined her every move. But dreams have a dark side, and in post-war Los Angeles, the city that promised opportunity also hid danger in its shadows. That morning in January, the city awoke to horror, but no one yet knew the story behind the girl who had become the Black Dahlia. The police were baffled. How could someone be so cruel, so precise, so calculated? The scene suggested more than just a murder. It hinted at obsession, at knowledge of anatomy, at something almost clinical. And yet, there were no witnesses, no immediate suspects, and no clear motive. The press ran wild, feeding public fascination, turning Elizabeth Short from a young woman with a story into a symbol of terror and mystery. But the media was just scratching the surface. Every detail, every rumor, every conflicting report added another layer to a case that would grow colder with time. What really happened to Elizabeth Short? Was this the act of a random killer, or someone who knew her intimately? And why did this single crime capture the imagination of the entire nation? These questions would ignite a frenzy, drawing detectives, journalists, and curious citizens into a labyrinth of clues, suspects, and theories that continues to puzzle the world today. In this series, we're diving deep into the life, death, and legacy of Elizabeth Short, from her early struggles to her fateful final night, from the media storm to the suspects who haunted investigators. We'll explore every angle, every theory, and every chilling detail. By the end, you'll see why the Black Dahlia remains one of the most compelling mysteries of all time. And believe me, the story is far darker and stranger than any headline ever suggested. Who was Elizabeth Short? Elizabeth Short wasn't born famous. She wasn't born in a world of glitz, glamour, or Hollywood lights. She was born on July 29th, 1924, in Boston, Massachusetts, the youngest of 5 children in a family that had its fair share of struggles. Her father, a World War I veteran, struggled with alcoholism and eventually left the family, leaving her mother to raise the children alone. Growing up, Elizabeth learned early that life could be harsh, unpredictable, and unfair. Yet, even in those difficult circumstances, there was something remarkable about her. She was ambitious, she was charming, and she carried a spark that made people notice her. In her teenage years, Elizabeth's life was marked by instability. The family moved often, chasing jobs, trying to stay afloat. Friends described her as lively, talkative, and friendly, someone who could light up a room despite the chaos in her personal life. She was drawn to the idea of a better life, a life beyond the narrow streets of small towns and the struggles of a broken home. And like so many young women of her time, Hollywood called to her like a siren song. It promised fame, fortune, and an escape from a life that seemed determined to hold her back. By the early 1940s, Elizabeth had set her sights on California. She was determined, resourceful, and willing to do whatever it took to chase her dream. She took small jobs, moved frequently, and even adopted a glamorous persona that would later become part of her legend. Her letters to friends often talked about auditions, about meeting new people, and about the excitement and loneliness of trying to make it in a city full of dreamers like her. But the city wasn't always kind. Opportunities were scarce, and the world of Hollywood was far harsher than the postcards promised. Elizabeth's social life was a mix of ambition and adventure. She was known to frequent nightclubs and bars, looking for connections, friends, or maybe just a good story. She had a taste for fashion, style, and the little luxuries that made her feel glamorous, even if only for a night. But there were whispers too, rumors about relationships, flirtations, and late-night outings that painted a complicated picture of a young woman exploring her independence in a city that could be as dangerous as it was exciting. Despite the glamour she sometimes projected, there was vulnerability behind her smile. She longed for recognition, for someone to see her not just as a pretty face, but as a person with dreams, intelligence, and ambition. That desire, that hunger for something bigger, would eventually lead her down a path filled with peril. By the time she arrived in Los Angeles, Elizabeth Short was no longer just a girl from Boston. She was a young woman chasing the Hollywood dream, full of hope, curiosity, and the kind of energy that makes people remember her. And yet, even as she walked the streets of Los Angeles, meeting new people and pursuing opportunities, danger was quietly closing in. Every choice, every night out, every encounter carried risk, and tragically, one of those nights would end in the most horrifying way imaginable. In understanding Elizabeth Short, we see more than a murder victim. We see a young woman with ambitions, flaws, courage, and dreams. We see a person whose life mattered long before the headlines and the nickname Black Dahlia. And as we follow her story closer to that fateful night, we begin to understand the human side of a mystery that has obsessed the world for more than 70 years. The fateful night. The night of January 14th, 1947, began like any other for Elizabeth Short, or at least it seemed that way to anyone observing from the outside. By then, she was already known in certain Hollywood circles, moving between friends, acquaintances, and the occasional admirer. But that night, the streets of Los Angeles would witness the last footsteps of a young woman chasing dreams in a city that didn't always play fair. Elizabeth had been seen earlier in the evening at a bar in downtown Los Angeles. Some witnesses claimed she was lively, laughing with friends, discussing plans for auditions, and maybe even hinting at hopes for new connections. Others described her as restless, almost impatient, like she was searching for something or someone that could change her life. The exact details of where she went next are fragmented, pieced together from conflicting reports and fleeting memories of strangers. What is clear, however, is that she was never seen alive again after that night. Friends later recounted how Elizabeth often had a habit of accepting rides from strangers, of trusting the wrong people because she was so focused on her goals. Some believed she had met someone that evening, someone she thought she could rely on. Others suspected she simply got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. What makes the night so haunting is not just the mystery of her disappearance, but the realization that she may have sensed danger, yet had no idea how close it was. By the time the night deepened into early morning, Elizabeth had vanished from the radar of everyone who knew her. Her absence was not immediately alarming. It was not unusual for young women chasing careers in Los Angeles to disappear for hours, drifting between bars, friends' apartments, or late-night diners. But by morning, the city would awaken to a discovery so horrific it would freeze the imagination of the entire nation. No one knew it at the time, but the streets she walked, the people she met, and the choices she made that night would all become fragments of a puzzle that police and investigators would spend decades trying to solve. Every lead, every rumor, every conflicting account would be dissected, debated, and questioned. And yet, the truth of Elizabeth Short's final hours remained almost impossibly elusive, like smoke slipping through the fingers of those desperate to hold on to it. Her fateful night is a chilling reminder that danger often lurks where we least expect it, and that even a life full of hope and ambition can end abruptly in the darkest of ways. The next morning, a passerby would stumble upon a scene that no one could have imagined. A scene so grotesque, so meticulously arranged, that it would become a defining symbol of evil and mystery in Los Angeles history. A gruesome crime scene. The morning of January 15th, 1947, started like any other for the residents of Leimert Park, a quiet neighborhood in Los Angeles. But what one local woman was about to stumble upon would shatter the calm forever. As she walked along a vacant lot, she noticed something unusual, something that didn't belong on the cold, dew-covered ground. At first, it looked like a discarded mannequin, but the closer she got, the more horrifying it became. It was not a dummy. It was the lifeless, mutilated body of a young woman. Elizabeth Short's body had been cut cleanly in half at the waist. Her limbs were posed unnaturally, and her face bore a haunting, almost eerie calm. The killer had drained all the blood from her body, leaving her pale, cold, and ghostly. Her skin had been scrubbed, her mouth slashed into a grotesque smile, that no one alive could forget. The scene was not only a murder, it was a statement, an act so calculated and precise that it suggested knowledge of anatomy and an unthinkable level of planning. The discovery immediately drew the attention of the police and the press. Officers who arrived on the scene were reportedly shocked, some nearly fainting at the sight. Detectives began the painstaking process of photographing, measuring, and cataloging the scene. But the questions far outnumbered the answers. Who could commit such a brutal act? Why this level of cruelty? And why pose her body in such a grotesque way? As the news spread, journalists descended on the scene, their typewriters clicking furiously as headlines were written before all the facts were confirmed. The nickname Black Dahlia was born, partly inspired by a contemporary movie and partly by the media's desire to sensationalize a crime that was already terrifying enough on its own. Public fascination grew overnight. People were terrified, intrigued, and unable to look away from the story. Every detail of Elizabeth's life and death was examined, dissected, and debated in newspapers, radio broadcasts, and gossip columns. Meanwhile, the police faced an impossible task. There were no clear witnesses, no immediate suspects, and no solid motive. The city was full of people who could have wanted Elizabeth dead, but the meticulous nature of the crime suggested someone far more deliberate, far more dangerous than a random criminal. Point. Every clue, every scrap of evidence had to be analyzed carefully. But it was like trying to piece together a puzzle with most of the pieces missing. The gruesomeness of the scene left a lasting impression on Los Angeles. Citizens whispered about the Black Dahlia murder with a mix of fear and fascination, and the media's relentless coverage ensured that the case would never fade into obscurity. The horrific precision, the posed body, and the mystery surrounding Elizabeth Short's final hours created a story that was both horrifying and irresistible. A story that would haunt the city and the world for decades. And yet, even with the police investigation underway, the questions were only beginning. How had the killer managed to evade detection? What connections might Elizabeth have had that led to her death? And could anyone truly understand the mind behind such a terrifying crime? The next chapter in this story would take us deeper into the investigation, as detectives scrambled to piece together the life and death of the Black Dahlia. The police investigation begins. From the moment Elizabeth Short's body was discovered, the Los Angeles Police Department faced a case unlike any they had ever encountered. The crime scene alone was so shocking and meticulously staged that it challenged even the most experienced detectives. Officers combed the lot for clues, interviewed anyone who might have seen Elizabeth in her final hours, and examined every detail of the mutilation for evidence of the killer's identity. But the case quickly proved. Detectives soon realized this was no random act of violence. The precision of the cuts suggested knowledge of anatomy, possibly medical or surgical experience. The posed body and drained blood implied not just rage, but calculation, even obsession. Officers began mapping Elizabeth's last known movements, trying to reconstruct her final night, piece by piece. Friends and acquaintances were questioned repeatedly, but memories conflicted, alibis were shaky, and witnesses offered little more than speculation. The investigation quickly drew attention beyond law enforcement. Reporters camped near the police headquarters, publishing every small detail as if it were a confession. This media frenzy added both pressure and complication, as false leads and sensationalized rumors distracted from the facts. Officers had to navigate not only the complexity of the case, but the growing public obsession, which sometimes hampered their work instead of helping it. Early suspects ranged widely. Former boyfriends, acquaintances, strangers who had crossed paths with Elizabeth, all came under scrutiny. Some had minor criminal records. Others were completely unknown to authorities, but had been spotted in her vicinity. Each lead opened new questions, yet none led to a solid breakthrough. One theory suggested that Elizabeth might have been lured by someone she trusted, but there was no proof. The police were chasing shadows, while the killer remained several steps ahead, leaving no fingerprints, no witnesses, no obvious motive. The investigators also faced internal pressure. Los Angeles was a city still healing from the turbulence of the post-war years, and a crime this grotesque put the police under a national microscope. They worked tirelessly, often around the clock. But the case seemed designed to frustrate them. Evidence disappeared or contradicted other findings, and leads that seemed promising often fizzled out. The murder wasn't just unsolved, it was confounding. Even with modern investigative techniques, the case challenged basic assumptions. The meticulous nature of the crime suggested a killer who wanted to be noticed, yet simultaneously remain invisible. Every piece of evidence collected could point to multiple possibilities, and the detectives' frustration grew as each potential lead collapsed. The early investigation of the Black Dahlia case set a pattern that would define it for decades. An intricate, unsolvable puzzle. The police could trace Elizabeth's last known movements, list hundreds of suspects, and analyze every shred of evidence. Yet the true killer remained hidden. And as the investigation continued, the media's obsession only grew, transforming Elizabeth Short from a tragic young woman into a symbol of mystery, terror, and intrigue. By the end of the first weeks, the LAPD had a sense of the enormity of the challenge. They knew that solving this case would require more than standard detective work. It would demand insight into human behavior, the dark corners of Los Angeles, and perhaps even the mind of a killer, unlike any they had seen before. And as the investigation unfolded, theories and rumors began to take shape, some believable, some wildly speculative, all adding to the mystique of the Black Dahlia. media frenzy, and public obsession. As soon as news of Elizabeth Short's murder hit the presses, Los Angeles, and eventually the entire country, was captivated. The story was shocking enough on its own. A young woman brutally murdered, her body posed in a way that was almost ritualistic. But the newspapers and radio broadcasts added their own flair, creating a narrative that gripped the public imagination and turned Elizabeth into the infamous Black Dahlia. Journalists were relentless, often racing to publish sensationalized accounts before facts were verified. Headlines screamed of mutilation, violence, and mystery. Reporters speculated endlessly, sometimes linking Elizabeth to the Hollywood elite, to shady acquaintances, or to criminal underworlds. Every detail of her life was scrutinized, from her ambitions to her friendships, from her clothing to the bars she frequented. Nothing was too small or too personal for public consumption. The media frenzy created a mix of fear, fascination, and obsession. People whispered about the Black Dahlia in cafes, workplaces, and homes, treating the crime almost like a dark Hollywood story. Some were terrified, imagining that such a brutal crime could happen to anyone, anywhere. Others were intrigued, drawn to the mystery of the young woman whose life had ended in such a shocking way. The combination of horror and glamour made the story irresistible. This obsession had real consequences for the investigation. While public interest helped keep attention on the case, it also generated countless false leads, hoaxes, and self-proclaimed witnesses. Detectives had to sift through hundreds of letters and tips, some credible, others clearly written by people seeking attention or attempting to mislead authorities. The media had amplified the case so much that separating fact from fiction became nearly impossible. At the same time, the press gave Elizabeth Short a kind of tragic celebrity status. She became a symbol of vulnerability and ambition, a young woman whose dreams collided with a world that could be cruel and unforgiving. The nickname Black Dahlia added a layer of intrigue, making her a character in the public imagination rather than just a victim. People debated her choices, her personality, and even her morality, reflecting the social attitudes of the time, while the reality of her humanity was often lost in the frenzy. The public obsession also meant that every suspect, every theory, every rumor received attention. Detectives were under immense pressure, expected to deliver results in a case that defied easy explanation. And while the city buzzed with speculation, the killer remained hidden, almost daring investigators to catch them. Ultimately, the media frenzy transformed the Black Dahlia case from a local tragedy into a national sensation. It blurred the lines between reality and fiction, between the life of a real young woman and the myth that the press was creating. And it ensured that Elizabeth Short's story would not be forgotten, even as the decades stretched on and the case remained unsolved. Suspects emerge. As the investigation into Elizabeth Short's murder deepened, the LAPD found itself in a web of conflicting information, rumors, and leads that often led nowhere. Almost immediately, a long list of suspects emerged, some familiar, some complete strangers, and each seemed to offer a possible explanation for the brutal crime. But none provided the breakthrough detectives desperately needed. Friends and acquaintances of Elizabeth were questioned extensively. Some described her as friendly, ambitious, and charming, while others hinted at a more secretive side. Former boyfriends became prime suspects. Their motives were often tied to jealousy, anger, or failed relationships, and investigators had to consider whether one of them could have acted with such horrifying violence. Yet most alibis checked out, leaving the police frustrated and without answers. One of the most infamous suspects would later be Dr. George Hogel, a wealthy Los Angeles physician with a dark reputation. Some theories suggested he had medical knowledge that could explain the precise mutilation of Elizabeth's body. Detectives looked into his social circles, his movements, and his connections, but hard evidence was scarce. Even decades later, Hodel's name remains one of the most discussed in connection with the case, illustrating how tantalizing a suspect can be even without definitive proof. Other suspects included men with criminal records, transient workers, and those involved in the Hollywood nightlife Elizabeth frequented. The police chased hundreds of leads, each one taking them into a different corner of Los Angeles, sometimes to dead ends, other times to tantalizing but inconclusive evidence. Some suspects were publicly named in newspapers, which created additional complications, and the emergence of multiple suspects also highlighted the limitations of law enforcement at the time. There were no advanced forensic techniques like DNA analysis, and fingerprint evidence was often contaminated or incomplete. Detectives relied on interviews, intuition, and the painstaking piecing together of timelines, which left plenty of room for uncertainty. Every suspect came with a story, a possible motive, and yet nothing concrete to pin the crime on anyone. Public fascination didn't help either. The press loved sensational suspects and often amplified theories without evidence. Each new lead became a story, each theory a debate, which kept the case in the public eye, but sometimes misdirected investigators. Despite tireless work, months passed, then years, without the police being able to identify a killer. Even today, the Black Dahlia case remains a puzzle, partly because the suspects were so numerous, and partly because evidence was so limited. Detectives and historians have analyzed every possible lead, but the true identity of the killer remains a mystery. The investigation into suspects reveals not only the complexity of the case, but also the dark, shadowy world of post-war Los Angeles, a city where ambition, desperation, and danger often collided in unexpected ways. Theories and conspiracies. As the investigation dragged on, with no definitive answers, speculation about Elizabeth Short's murder grew wilder, darker, and more compelling. Everyone had a theory, from detectives to journalists to armchair sleuths. And over time, these theories evolved into full-blown conspiracies that continue to fascinate people today. One theory suggested that Elizabeth's murder was connected to organized crime, Post-war Los Angeles was rife with gang activity, prostitution rings, and underground dealings. Some believed she had crossed the wrong people, either knowingly or by accident, and that her brutal death was a warning to others. Others suspected that she had stumbled upon something illegal, perhaps information about a crime or a corrupt figure, and had been silenced as a result. While intriguing, these theories were mostly circumstantial and offered no hard evidence. Another line of speculation focused on Hollywood itself. The city was filled with aspiring actors, socialites, and influential figures, and rumors swirled that Elizabeth had been involved with someone in the entertainment industry who wanted her dead. Some even theorized that her murder was a Hollywood cover-up, designed to protect someone famous. While these claims were sensationalized by the media, they added a layer of mystery that kept the public hooked for decades. Then there was the Dr. George Huddle theory, which remains one of the most famous. Huddle was a physician with connections to the Hollywood elite and a dark reputation. Some investigators and authors argue that his medical knowledge explains the precise mutilation of Elizabeth's body. Evidence is sparse, but photographs, journals, and circumstantial details have kept his name linked to the case long after his death. To many, Huddle represents the possibility that the killer was intelligent, calculating, and able to evade justice through both wealth and cunning. Psychological profiles also became part of the discussion. Some experts suggested the murder indicated a sadistic, organized killer with obsessive tendencies. Others speculated on a possible copycat or serial killer element, pointing to similarities with other unsolved murders at the time. Each theory attempted to make sense of the grotesque scene and the methodical nature of the crime, but every answer seemed to generate more questions. Even modern investigations haven't closed the case. Advances in DNA technology, cold case reviews, and newly uncovered evidence have given hope that the truth might someday emerge. Yet, the Black Dahlia case continues to defy closure, partly because the sheer number of theories makes it almost impossible to separate fact from fiction. What's striking is how these theories reflect society itself. They expose the fears, obsessions, and dark curiosities of Los Angeles in the late 1940s and beyond. They show how a single horrific crime can become a canvas for suspicion, rumor, and imagination. The Black Dahlia is more than a murder. It's a mirror reflecting both the darkness in human nature and the enduring fascination with the unknown. As we move forward, we'll see how modern investigators and historians have tried to untangle these theories, seeking the truth buried under decades of speculation and sensationalism. The case continues to inspire obsession, study, and debate, proving that some mysteries never truly die. Modern investigations, decades after Elizabeth Short's brutal murder, the Black Dahlia case remained one of Los Angeles's most haunting mysteries. But even as time passed, modern investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths refused to let it fade into obscurity. With advances in forensic science, technology, and investigative techniques, people hoped that the cold case might finally yield answers. One major development came from renewed scrutiny of old evidence. Detectives revisited photographs, police reports, and witness statements, looking for overlooked clues or inconsistencies. Sometimes small details that had been dismissed in 1947 became crucial. A handwritten note, a photograph, a minor discrepancy in a witness account. These fragments were re-examined under a modern lens, revealing patterns that had gone unnoticed for decades. DNA analysis also offered hope, although the case presented enormous challenges. Most physical evidence had degraded over the years, and contamination was a serious concern. Still, scientists attempted to extract genetic material from surviving samples, cross-referencing them with modern databases. While these efforts have yet to identify the killer definitively, they demonstrate how technology might one day provide answers that were impossible in the mid-20th century. Investigative journalism played a huge role in keeping the case alive. Books, documentaries, and interviews with former detectives, witnesses, and family members have uncovered details that never reached the public before. Authors meticulously pieced together timelines, explored suspects like Dr. George Hodel, and analyzed the crime from psychological, sociological, and criminological perspectives. Each new theory added depth to the mystery, but also revealed just how complex and elusive the truth remained. Modern investigators also examined patterns in other unsolved murders from the same era, looking for connections or potential serial offenses. Some noted striking similarities in the methodical nature of the killings, suggesting that the Black Dahlia might have been part of a larger, more disturbing pattern. Other leads traced Elizabeth's social connections, nightlife, and potential interactions with dangerous individuals, exploring angles that detectives in 1947 could not fully pursue. Despite all these modern efforts, the Black Dahlia case continues to defy closure. Every new investigation brings tantalizing possibilities, but also deepens the mystery. It's a reminder that some crimes are so meticulous, so calculated, that even modern science struggles to unravel them. The case has become more than a search for a killer. It's a study of obsession, of human curiosity, and of the enduring fascination with the unknown. As we move forward, we'll explore the psychological side of the case, attempting to understand both Elizabeth Short's life and the mind of the killer, which is central to unraveling why this murder has captivated the world for so long. Psychological analysis. To understand the Black Dahlia case, it's not enough to look at the crime scene or the evidence alone. We also have to look at the human elements, the psychology behind the murder, the personality of Elizabeth Short, and the mind of someone capable of such brutality. Elizabeth was ambitious, curious, and full of life, but also vulnerable in ways that made her an easy target in post-war Los Angeles. She was a young woman seeking fame in a city filled with dreamers, opportunists, and predators. Her social habits, frequenting nightclubs, trusting acquaintances, and being eager to make connections, might have exposed her to danger. But they also reflect a human desire for connection, recognition, and a better life. Understanding her choices doesn't excuse her fate, but it gives context to the tragedy. The killer, on the other hand, demonstrates characteristics that are chillingly specific. The precision of the mutilation, the posed body, and the complete draining of blood suggests someone highly organized, methodical, and possibly obsessed. Profilers argue that this person likely had a deep fixation, either with control, death, or a combination of both. The act wasn't spontaneous. It required planning, skill, and a calm, cold detachment from the reality of murder. Some experts propose that the killer could have been someone with medical knowledge, or at least someone accustomed to handling bodies, as the clean cuts indicate a disturbing familiarity with anatomy. The posed body also points to a psychological need to dominate or communicate a message through the crime, turning Elizabeth into an object in a macabre tableau. This kind of behavior is often associated with organized serial offenders, people who derive satisfaction from the act itself and the subsequent attention it generates. Yet the mystery deepens because of the killer's ability to vanish. There were no eyewitnesses, no clear forensic traces, and no immediate motive that could be identified. This suggests intelligence, patience, and perhaps a manipulative personality capable of evading law enforcement for decades. The fact that the case remains unsolved underscores the killer's meticulous planning and the difficulty of deciphering such a calculated mind. Psychologically, the Black Dahlia case is fascinating and horrifying because it's not just a murder. It's a study in obsession, control, and the dark extremes of human behavior. It also highlights the vulnerabilities of young women like Elizabeth, whose ambitions and trust in people could inadvertently place them in danger. The intersection of victim and perpetrator psychology is what makes this case endlessly analyzed and speculated upon, even 70+ years later. In the next part, we'll explore the impact and legacy of the Black Dahlia case, how it influenced culture, crime investigation, and the way society perceives unsolved mysteries. This part ties together Elizabeth's story with its lasting impression on Los Angeles and the world. Impact and legacy. The murder of Elizabeth Short didn't just shock Los Angeles in 1947. It left a mark that would ripple through decades, shaping culture, crime reporting, and public fascination with unsolved mysteries. The Black Dahlia case became more than a tragedy. It became a symbol of the city's dark side, a reminder that behind the glitter of Hollywood lurked shadows of danger, ambition, and obsession. Hollywood, with its fascination for drama and glamour, was quick to latch onto the story. Movies, novels, and television shows drew inspiration from Elizabeth's life and death, sometimes blurring fact and fiction. The term Black Dahlia entered the popular lexicon, evoking images of murder, mystery, and the cruel side of fame. Writers and filmmakers explored not only the crime itself, but also the societal pressures gender dynamics, and ambition that shaped Elizabeth's life, turning her story into a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking the spotlight in a city obsessed with success. The case also transformed journalism. Reporters covering the Black Dahlia murder sensationalized details, sometimes blurring the line between reporting and storytelling. This approach influenced crime reporting for decades, demonstrating the power of media to shape public perception, create myths, and even pressure law enforcement. While this intense attention kept the case alive, it also complicated the investigation, introducing rumors, hoaxes, and false leads that detectives had to navigate. In law enforcement, the Black Dahlia case became a benchmark for complex investigations. It highlighted the challenges of forensic limitations, the need for careful evidence handling, and the importance of psychological profiling. Modern investigators studying the case apply techniques from criminal profiling, cold case analysis, and even forensic science to understand patterns in unsolved murders. Elizabeth's story continues to teach lessons about crime solving, particularly in cases involving meticulous killers who leave few traces. Culturally, the Black Dahlia has become an enduring fascination because it combines horror, mystery, and the human element of ambition and vulnerability. People remain captivated because it's a story they can relate to on multiple levels. The allure of dreams, the dangers of trust, and the unfathomable nature of violence. The case also sparks discussions about the objectification and vulnerability of women, the consequences of sensationalized media, and the human obsession with solving the unsolvable. Decades later, Elizabeth Short is remembered not just as a victim, but as a symbol of the unknown. A young woman whose life and death continue to intrigue, horrify, and inspire. The Black Dahlia is proof that some mysteries never truly fade. They evolve, adapt, and continue to capture the imagination of every new generation. As we reach the final part of this story, we'll summarize the case, reflect on the unanswered questions, and provide a closing thought that connects Elizabeth's life, the mystery, and the lasting fascination with the Black Dahlia. Conclusion and call to action. The story of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, is more than a tale of murder. It's a haunting journey through ambition, vulnerability, and the darker corners of human nature. Her life, though tragically cut short, reveals a young woman chasing dreams in a city that promised opportunity but delivered danger. Her death shocked Los Angeles, captivated the nation, and has continued to fascinate people for over 70 years. Despite decades of investigation, hundreds of suspects, and countless theories, the case remains unsolved. The killer was never caught, the motive remains unclear, and the details of that fateful night are still debated. Yet the mystery endures not just because of the crime itself, but because of the human stories entwined with it. Elizabeth's dreams, the tireless work of detectives, the obsession of the media, and the public's endless curiosity. The Black Dahlia case teaches us about the fragility of life, the dangers hidden in ambition and trust, and the way certain mysteries capture the collective imagination. It reminds us that sometimes truth is elusive, and some questions may never be answered. But the fascination, the investigation, and the human connection to the story ensure that Elizabeth Short will never be forgotten. Her legacy lives on, not only in books, movies, and documentaries, but also in the lessons it offers about society, crime, and the human psyche. And while the mystery may never be solved, her story continues to inspire, warn, and intrigue. If you want to explore more chilling, unsolved mysteries and the stories behind them, watch the next video on your screen now.